Charizard EX has kind of been around since the beginning of time, it feels like. And the deck has had its major successes. It's won multiple events, it's won an IC, I'm pretty sure, and it has always done well at events. However, recently, it has been in a bit of a slump. Only thanks to Gabriel Fernandez have we seen it actually win anything meaningful, which was NAIC 2025 in the senior division. However, over in the master division in the same tournament, we saw only one Charizard Pidgeot in the top 256. Only one, and it placed 217th, thanks to Frank Luciano. So the deck was not in a great position. However, recently, if we scroll a bit up, the World Championships happened, and we saw 3 Charizard Pidgeots in the top 16. This is really cool. We saw another Charizard Dragapult in the top 128, thanks to Matej Nesvadba. Sorry if I butchered that. But the deck has kind of been on a rise, and you'll be like, well, why is that? Why has it all of a sudden started to do better? Well, that's because of 2 major things. One is it has a decent matchup into Gardevoir. And 2, it has a decent matchup into Goldengo. These are 2 of the main reasons that this deck is currently in an okay position. Without these 2 matchups, the deck would be nowhere near as successful as it is right now. But, on the other hand, we have this exact same deck having an 18% win rate against Dragapult Dusknoir at the World Championships as well. So a very contrasting matchup spread. And you'll be thinking, okay, but moving forward, Dragapult Dusknoir isn't going anywhere. How is this deck ever going to be a meta staple with Dragapult Dusknoir running rampant? Well, that's with the introduction of a single card. That little goober over there, Psyduck, prevents Pokemon from being able to commit Sudoku. Basically, Dusknoir can't pop itself and put damage counters on your board because this card prevents your opponent's Pokemon from, well, dying to themselves. So it is quite a big buff, because that now makes that matchup that was oh so terrible become not favored, but a lot better for you than it would have been otherwise. And today we're going to be taking a look at a few deck lists over from Japan that I found and that I think are quite interesting. Starting off with this deck list over here. This deck list might look a little bit different, and that's because, well, we are kind of running a Fan Rotom Terra engine alongside Double Water Ogerpon as our basic Terra Pokemon of choice. That's because not a lot of decks respect the Torrential Pump. And the nice thing about this deck is, unlike Terra decks that really struggle to, set back up after an Iono or after a Judge or an Unfair Stamp or just hand disruption in general, this deck can set back up thanks to its Pidgeot, and also the Charizard itself doesn't exactly just die. It has 330 HP. It's not going anywhere very easily. And thanks to these 2 cards, this deck is able to use Torrential Pump quite aggressively, because sure, Crispin is able to attach energy onto your Torrential Pumps, and you'll think, okay, cool, but now once the Crispins are done, I can't really do too much more. Well, that's because Charizard EX is its own energy acceleration, which is super, super strong. Because now, even if we don't want to use Crispin, or we want to use Boss's Orders for a turn instead, now we can use that Boss's Orders in the same turn, evolve into a Charizard, attach 2 Fire Energy onto our Water Ogerpon and 1 Energy onto the Charizard itself so that it can attack in the following turn, manually attach our Water Energy, and bam, we've got ourselves an attacker. Or we can even attach the Crystal. So in one turn, just like Terra Box, we can get Water Ogerpon online with Crispin plus Crystal. And that is obviously very, very strong, because now against decks like Charizard, against decks like Dragapult, we have a very aggressive early game. The thing is, against Dragapult, is you never really had a good answer in the early game. Like, swinging with Charizard was never great. Charizard decks don't really play Badoo. They'd rather play Cleffa or TM Evolution or stuff like that, so Badoo just never really felt good on the deck. And now we have an answer to that early aggression, being the Water Ogerpon. And unlike regular Terra Box that can be disrupted very easily, this deck, like I said, doesn't get disrupted as easily. If we scroll down to take a look at some of the other deck lists, you'll see as I scroll further down, the more and more Terra decks or Terra versions of the deck are kind of like presented. However, this was the next list I wanted to look at. And this is honestly, I think, the most like consistent and well put together version of the deck. So this is classic Dragapult Pidgeot. There are a few flex cards that I feel like you could move around, such as the Shaman if you didn't want it to, but other than that, this deck seems really, really solid. It is an Arven-based build with a TM evolution, with thicker lines of the evolution being a 2-1-2 Pidgeot and a 3-2-2 Charizard. And I kind of like the 3-2-2 Charizard because honestly, just like Dragapult, this deck doesn't really realistically need that many Charizards, and you do play double Super Rod, so you can establish a third Charizard if you want. You also play triple Ray Candy, so at the end of the game, after you've used your TM evolution to get into your first Charizard and your Pidgeot, you can use your Ray Candy to be a little bit more aggressive towards the end of the game and re-establish a Charizard. The thing that Dragapult lacks is that intermediate attacker, is that the transitional attacker, that where you go from the beginning of the game to the late game. So for example, Dragapult goes Badoo into Dragapult, whereas Charizard can go from well, not really an attack, more so like Cleffa / TM Evo into Charizard, and then back into a one-price board state with Chi-Yu, and then back into Charizard itself. And this is incredibly strong, because Chi-Yu, you guys probably already know, but this helps a lot against matchups like Raging Bolt, like Goldengo, and anything that is really weak to fire. And that's the best part about it. Obviously, Charizard attaches fire energy, and itself is a dark type, meaning you have a good matchup into Gardevoir. That's the reason, you know, your Gardevoir matchup is fine, and this helps you have a good matchup against those beatdown decks. So this kind of covers a lot of the bases. And another thing would be is that Charizard's damage scaling isn't great. If you are able to get a little bit aggressive, you're only doing 180 damage in the beginning of the game. And if you take a look at this deck, well, it doesn't really have the Dusclops or Dusk Noir to accelerate the damage very quickly. Instead, we've got Max Belt. Thanks to the Arven based build, it's fairly easy to find, meaning even if we're only attacking for 180, we slap on a Max Belt, bam, we're doing 230, which is a much more relevant number. We're killing almost every single basic EX Pokemon other than basically Ursaluna, but Ursaluna is only really relevant towards the end of the game, which you'll be hitting for higher numbers anyway. If we take a look at the supporter line, like we've mentioned already, this is a Arven based build, but as we know, Lily's Determination is coming out, and that is obviously a very, very strong card. Shuffle, draw 8 if you haven't taken prize cards, and draw 6 if you have taken prize cards. And Charizard is one of those decks, just as Dragapult, just as Gardevoir, that kind of wants to set up before you get very aggressive. So Lily's Determination is very nice because it lets you set up your big stage 2s and have a more, like, stable board state before actually going in and start swinging. This deck is very comfortable from playing from behind, just like most stage 2 decks. You play a heavy counter catcher line, and you play a lot of cards that are very good for, you know, bringing games back. Charizard does have a chunky 330 HP, meaning double Monkey Dory is quite nice. Just as Gardevoir, where you have your own energy engine, meaning your attaches for turn can be committed to the Monkey Dory. Exact same thing with Charizard. When you evolve, you attach your energy, and your manual attachments can go to the double Monkey Dory that you're playing, which will help against the decks like Dragapult and Grimmsnarl and Gardevoir. The thing is that against Grimmsnarl and against Gardevoir, the decks that usually spread a lot of damage, we've seen Gardevoir incorporating Fluttermane, which can be a little bit more difficult for you as well now, and they spread a lot of damage, and sometimes your double Monkey Dory can get overwhelmed if you're not able to find them quickly, and then at the end of the game, you can very easily lose to a TM de-evolution. That's why you'll see this list including a one-off Mist Energy, meaning towards the end of the game, you can slap, or even in the middle of the game, you can slap a Mist Energy onto your Pidgeot, and bam, that can't be de-evolved. And also, this Charmeleon over here, if this is a bench sitter, it can't be de-evolved either, which is super nice, because now not only are you keeping your Pidgeot alive through the TM de-evolution, you can now just go quick search for your Charizard, or if the TM de-evolution happens, you can get your Charizard that goes back into your hand and evolve your sitting Charmeleon on the bench straight away. So it really, like, puts the deck together very, very nicely. And you'll be thinking, oh, okay, but what happens if this guy's prized? Well, we do play one of Jacques. Obviously, we didn't really have a great way to find the Jacques, but Jacques is quite nice, meaning it can find a lot of our stage 1s, a lot of our stage 2s, and it is quite nice in the same way that a lot of evolution decks, but I feel like this spot is also cuttable. What would I cut it for? Honestly, I am a very big believer in Badoo, and I think Badoo could help slow down the game as well, and I would probably cut a rare candy or cut the Jacques for a second TM evolution, if we're being honest, because this deck does kind of look like it relies a lot on TM evolution. Another card that I wouldn't mind cutting would be the Shaman, and I would probably put in a second Pidgeotto to go for a more 2-2-2 line, because obviously sometimes, you know, you're playing against Dragapult, they go Badoo, you go TM evolution, and oh no, your Pidgeot's prized, and now you're not going to have a Pidgeot the next turn, and this deck really does rely on the Pidgeot. So, scrolling down, we'll take a look at quite a few lists that look very similar to what we were talking about right now, with the Double Monkey Dory, thicker like evolution lines, but with a thin Charizard line, and then also Lily's Determination with an Arven-based build. And yeah, as we scroll down, you'll see more and more lists start to look a little bit similar. Like I said, here's a list with the 2 rare candy, and that honestly seems fine to me. But then we get onto the more aggressive lists, and what entails a deck being more aggressive. Well, we'll see that this deck over here is playing the Dusk Noir line. It is playing a 2-1-1 line, which is very, very standard for Dragapult. I mean, for Charizard. Sorry, Dragapult's on my mind. And then a 3-2-2 Charizard line, which you'll see is very common, and also a 2-1-2 Pidgeot line. So obviously this deck can't play as many of these cards that kind of put the deck together. You'll see this deck's lacking a Cleffer, it's lacking the Shaman, it's lacking the Psyduck, but what it isn't lacking is aggression. However, this deck is what I would consider to be a very weak to Dragapult list. Obviously, there's no Psyduck. You're running Quad Candy, and you are still an Arven-based build. So, on top of that, you're also not running any Monkey Dories or any Luminous or Dark Energy. You are straight up Charizard, you are straight up going as aggressive as possible with your bombs, and then trying to close out the game with said bombs and a Briar with combination of Charizard. So you'll see that this list is very, very aggressive. We do see the Air Balloon, and you'll think, okay, but why would you really run Air Balloon? Charizard can attach to itself, your bombs can just pop themselves if, you know, they get stuck in active. Well, that's because we are running a Tatsugiri, and Tatsugiri is a perfect pivot Pokemon, PPP. And you'll think, but okay, why? Why is Tatsugiri actually good? Why is it better than a Cleffer? Well, that's for one specific reason, to be honest, and that is because this deck really wants to close out games with Briar. And you'll be thinking, oh, okay, but how exactly are you going to get to a position where you can just grab Briar? Well, thanks to Pidgeot and this being a very aggressive deck, you'll see a lot of these cards are very burnable, right? You see Quad Ultra Ball being able to thin the deck, everything else is like items and tools that can be attached to Pokemon. You only play one stadium, so that doesn't get clogged up too much, and the rest are Pokemon, which will usually be in play or in the discard pile, and the rest are just the supporters, which you'll be using in the beginning of the game to actually establish your own board state. So a lot of these will be used throughout the beginning of the game. And right now in a meta that is a little bit slower with these stage 2 Badoo decks, you'll see that a lot of these supporters just end up getting used. So towards the end of the game, you have a lot less cards, meaning that in use with Tatsugiri and Pidgeot, you can usually set up a checkmate with that Briar and Dusk Noir play. And the Air Balloon plays really well with the Tatsugiri, meaning every single turn after your opponent takes a knockout, you can just push up the Tatsugiri into the active position, be able to look at the top 6 cards of your decks, or if your opponent played an Iono, you can now shuffle your deck, and maybe now you'll be able to draw into something more useful with an Iono of your own, or you'll be able to draw something more useful with your Serendipity. So it does all pair very, very well. Another good use case for the Air Balloon would be for Charizard EX, because you'll think, oh, but Charizard can attach to itself and manually retreat. Well, that's the thing. Sometimes you don't want to do that, because against decks like Gardevoir, they can punish that very easily. Even Dragapult, they can go Mind Bend into your Charizard, and you don't really want to attack with a Charizard that has a 50-50 of just failing. So you'd probably want to discard that 2 energy and go into a Charizard. But now you got a Charizard on your bench, which has 0 energy on it. So now what's your opponent going to do? They're probably going to counter catch that bad boy up, Iono you, and then Scream Tail around that guy. So Air Balloon kind of prevents that. Air Balloon can just slap that onto that Charizard, retreat into your other Charizard, and then you can attack with that second Charizard, and if anything happens, you have your second Charizard on the bench with an Air Balloon and 2 energy ready anyway. So it is quite nice. And as we scroll further down, you'll see all these lists slowly start coming together. Here is the very item-heavy based build with a double town store. I kind of like this build as well, but like I said, honestly, if I was going to be playing this deck, I would probably look at something like this. This is, where is it? This. Something like this. This would probably be very similar to something that I would play, with maybe cut 1 rare candy for a TM Evolution, cut the Jacques, cut the Shaman, and then play around with those 2 slots, probably 1 more Pidgeot, and then a final card that is honestly up to you. But yeah, that's about it. Do I think Charizard's going to be good? I think it's going to be good. I think it can scale very well into the Mega Set, and I think it has a lot of different ways to play the deck, which is very nice, so it doesn't just get stale and boring, and I think the deck is pretty consistent. Pidgeot-based decks are usually pretty consistent, once you set up Pidgeot, that is, but I think the deck is pretty good. Alright, see ya.